Hi, I'm Michelle Veray.
And I'm Kimberly Trong, and we are the host of Crush Fictionally, a podcast all about your favorite fictional characters from movies, TV shows, and more.
Each episode, we pick a theme, curate a list of characters that we love, why we love them, and some fun facts about the people who created them.
So if you've ever felt a true connection with a fictional character,
tune in to Crush Fictionally on Campfire Media.
Or wherever you find your podcast.
Welcome back to Spinning Platters Presents How Did I Get Here? Yeah, this is our first episode in I think about a month maybe. I thought I'd put them out a little more frequently than that, but life gets busy. Today we've got Chris Appelgren, former president of Lookout Records, talking about being a kid in many bands that somehow got thrust into the world of running an independent record label. It's a good conversation. We got into a bit of the struggles of running a label and coming back from that, for those that listen to this thing regularly, I think we kind of have a routine of showing darkness and then light afterwards. And this is another one of those episodes. It's a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I will also let you know that we've got 3 in a row coming up that are all sort of Bay Area music legend peoples, and I'm pretty excited about them. And I've only recorded one of them so far, so I hope those other 2 show up, because then I would sound silly, or I'd have to replace them with even more legendary-ish people. I say and yeah a lot on this podcast, and I don't cut it out. That's rather silly of me. Anywho, crack open a mango White Claw and enjoy. Welcome. My guest today is Christopher Appelgren, music marketing extraordinaire, former president of Lookout Records, somebody that has played on many records that you had in college and in high school, that you probably put on again during the pandemic because everybody was re-listening to their high school punk rock days and their brand. At least I was. So hi Chris, welcome to How Did I Get Here?
Thank you so much, Dakin, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Excellent. And so I start every single one of these off with the same first question, and every single guest gets mad at it. So if you throw your computer against the wall and storm out of the room, I understand. So what was the musical experience that made you decide that this was my life?
I would say that I can pinpoint it. It was, I think, late 1990. I was, maybe 16 years old, or maybe about to be 16. And I came down from where I lived in rural Humboldt County to attend a big Lookout Records showcase at Gilman Street. I was involved in a very, nominal way with the label, even while I was still a teenager in high school, primarily helping label founder Lawrence Livermore fill mail orders and also assembling 7-inch records. This was a big show. It was a record release show for Green Day's first full-length album, 39 Smooth. as well as the band Neurosis's Lookout debut album, The Word is Law, or Word is Law, no, as well as a single by the Mr. T Experience and debut 7-inch by Sam I Am. So this was these were bands that were either notable at the time or would go on to be very notable, and they were all playing together to celebrate these kind of big releases for the label. And I'd agreed to come down and attend the show and help sell records. So I was going to be a merch guy. We filled up Larry's truck with boxes of T-shirts and all the new records, and drove down from the woods and set up at Gilman. And I was there early, just because it was a show that Larry wanted to be there early for. He had booked it and set it up. And remember there being confusion around the order that the bands would play in. Billy Joe from Green Day felt very nervous playing after the Mr. T Experience because they were a more established band. And Larry convinced him that because Green Day were celebrating the release of a new album and Mr. T Experience only had a 7-inch out, that it was justified. He allayed those concerns. But ultimately, what happened is I sat behind the merch table for most of the show, doing brisk sales, watching these incredible bands that I loved perform. And I remember we drove back up to Mendocino County, back to Larry's house afterwards. Like, even though the show ended after 1 o'clock, we made the trek back up north that night. And I was pulling various wads of cash out of different pockets that I had and trying to count it for Larry, and just realizing how I don't know, my mom had instilled in me this sort of that I needed to try to make money and sort of figure something out. And just the fact that just to sort of see money associated with these things that, that I loved and cared about and was interested in, that wow, that, this, you could actually maybe do something like this as your job and get away with it. It seems sort of revelatory. So I don't know that I made a decision, but I certainly had a realization that, doing things in music or connected to music was sort of a legitimate career.
Yeah, wow, that bill is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But still, thinking of it in terms of 1990, I don't know, it's hard for me to wrap my head around a world where the Mr. T Experience was the established act, the one with the fan base. Yeah, I forget that Neurosis was a Lookout band. They're so far removed from what the label is, and even their own scene. How did they fit in East Bay punk at that time?
I mean, very well. There certainly is a kind of a strain of more hardcore, darker music in the East Bay scene. Think about bands like Christ on Parade, from the kind of more active in the 80s, but Iconochrist and Grimple, and just these sort of more intense bands. Sleep, when they were before they became Sleep, they were Asbestos Death, which is very, very kind of similarly inspired to Neurosis. So yeah, I mean, they definitely kind of came from that that kind of heritage or scene thread. But I remember, just listening to that record specifically. Yeah, they did just a 7-inch and one album on Lookout. They might have stuck out a little bit like a sore thumb, but Leary used to, when we would stuff records and film mail orders, like play albums that me as a teenager, before the internet, had never, heard of, never knew the bands. They were always really fascinating. And King Crimson was one of those artists that I first discovered because Larry, played their record for me. And I definitely could hear a connection between what Neurosis was sort of doing, coming out of that thrashy hardcore into something, more moody and intense. But yeah, very, I guess it was just more, it was a regional scene, and we weren't yet, I didn't yet think about it being a certain style of music that would be so associated with Lookout, because there was a really diverse group of bands that were, on the label in those early days. And it kind of gets simplified, looking back. But at the time you had Yeasty Girls, a cappella rap, and Sticky and Isocracy. Yeah, just these bands that were really, really different. And so it made more sense then.
Yeah. As a quick aside, there was a Halloween show like 3 years ago where a band called the Yeasty Girls played, and I was so bummed to find out that they were a all-female Beastie Boys cover band, not the original Yeasty Girls playing a show again.
That is disappointing. I would agree.
Yeah, they were a great Beastie Boys cover band. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it was just heartbreaking. But then again, that means that the Yeasty Girls are one of like the 5 bands left to reunite. So, speaking of bands, so did you start? So what was your first band? Because
My first band. Yeah, continue to, I guess, first band that wasn't just a logo in a sketch pad and high concept that I dreamed up with my friends was probably my first high school band, the Dirty Donuts. We played one show that my mom organized at the Grange Hall that was across the street from my high school in Miranda, California. And we played with the only other high school band. They were a band called Bastille, named after the prison, but, kind of a sly, punny reference to the fact that they were a metal band. And I remember, not that many people showed up at this show. People definitely didn't like the Dirty Donuts as much as they liked Bastille. So they kind of won for the night. But yes, that was my very first band.
Yeah, but you kept going. Your first, if I'm not mistaken, your first band to like put out records was the Potato Men, correct?
No, I would say the very first band that was a band that I sort of tried to form a few different times, but was called Bumble Scrump. And we did one split 7-inch self-released with the band Rice from San Diego. That ended up we ended up kind of releasing an album of theirs on Lookout. And so we had just one split single with like 3 songs. And then we have an appearance, like a live recording on a Kill Rock Stars compilation. I think the second one is that Stars Kill Rock. Yeah, maybe the second of those that trilogy of early Kill Rock Stars comps.
Yeah, and so you kept doing the whole like playing in different bands for a while. Where in your like music playing chronology does jumping from playing to bands to being the full-time person that runs Lookout come from? Or when did that happen?
It really was they were happening kind of simultaneously. So I graduated early from high school and intended to attend UC Berkeley so I, and at the time, as I kind of mentioned, I was sort of helping Larry out with Lookout in various different, tasks. Some of the time it was helping lay out record covers that bands had given, kind of constructing the print-ready versions, making ads for fanzines, as well as the aforementioned like mail order and record assembly. And Larry had the original label had a PO box in Laytonville, which was not very far away from where I lived, and was sort of how I ended up kind of meeting him and getting connected with Lookout initially. And so, but he had really relocated full time to go back to school at Berkeley and got a studio apartment in down just off of University Avenue that was also serving as kind of like the label office. And so I moved to North Oakland and really had a few months before school was supposed to start. So I was working full time, renting a room for $100 a month. That was through two other people's bedrooms. And I will say one kind of fun aside, I let Aaron, Comic Bus, Bill Schneider, and Billy Joe use my bedroom for an initial practice for the band that would become Pinhead Gunpowder, and claim to fame of that room. And yeah, so I was, and then I also set about kind of trying to form this band. And kind of like convinced some of my friends to do that, and that became the group Bumble Scrump. But yeah, it was fairly pretty much at the same time. Like everybody was either in a band or trying to be in a band, or their band had just broken up. Just sort of part of that very music oriented underground community kind of happening in the East Bay.
Yeah. So Larry Livermore was, of course, the guy who started it. What do you think was about it that he saw in you where it was like, this is the guy to come after me?
I mean, that happened over a few years. I think I definitely, I think he needed help initially. He had started the label with David Hayes. They, personality wise, they just didn't really, there was always a pretty volatile. They were, arguing. Larry talks a lot about it in his book. And I never really knew David Hayes personally. I think, because I kind of came in and started filling in with some of the work that he had done after his departure, from the label. It was kind of like our two eras didn't align. The fact that he wasn't, it wasn't totally amicable with Larry, I think, further exacerbated that. But I think it was, he needed someone to help do these things. I was enthusiastic and, either showed some abilities that could, with some additional practice and training could help out. And I was willing to do it. I mean, it was the most exciting thing I could imagine, especially when I was in high school in the woods. And then, moving to the East Bay, it was a real job. And it was also, wasn't very lucrative job, but I mean, what other kind of, you're not going to get a very lucrative job at, 17 or 18 years old anyway. And I think I learned, how to do production. I, learned, more about layout. This was kind of at the beginning of the time when it was a lot of desktop publishing being done. So we would do like the original layouts on big boards, and paste, kind of manual paste up, and have to do paste up for each of the different formats. It's a lot different than how it's done now. I mean, Larry was always very encouraging. He, but a little bit of kind of a Midwest, East Coast, kind of cynical, half joking kind of vibe. So I guess I would say he would be a better person to answer what he saw in me. But I think by the time, he did leave the label in kind of like the late 90s. I think it made it official in early 97. But he had been kind of stepping away to a larger and larger degree before that. And I think it was, at that point in time, it was kind of, I had really focused my life on the label. And so it kind of just made sense. There had been three of us, Larry, myself, and Patrick Hines, that had sort of were, I guess I was kind of like a junior partner at the time, as was Pat. And when Larry decided to kind of, fully exit the business, Pat also did as an owner, although he stayed on as an employee for a number of years afterwards, and was kind of part of the community of people running the company. But I don't know. I mean, I was in my early 20s. I'm not sure if it was the right thing for me to do. I'm not sure if it was the right choice for Larry to have made. I definitely, there was a lot of experience that would have been valuable that I'd yet to have had. But I guess, it was just that I had the conviction and the understanding and, to kind of do that. I think it would have just been over if he had tried to sell it to, like, say, another bigger company or a major label or something. That would have just really been the end of Lookout.
Yeah. I mean, also thinking about 97 in just the greater scheme of music, that's the most insane time to be thrown into running Lookout. I mean, that was about the time, like, Green Day had already been broken for a couple of years. They were already on a major. But that was that time where there was that kind of second wave of bands on the label that were breaking, like Mr. T Experience were kind of getting bigger again. I'm for some reason I'm spacing on the band that Squirt Gun was a side project of.
Screeching Weasel.
Screeching Weasel. How did I forget Screeching? Actually, I know how I forgot Screeching Weasel, because didn't their frontman end up being really not good after a while?
Ben is certainly someone that has rubbed a lot of people wrong and has done some things that I, can't offer any explanation for, like fighting with audience members physically, things like that. But yes, and and the sort of the story of Lookout and Lookout's both success and demise is definitely sort of intertwined with Screeching Weasel, and even the story of Larry's departure. That's probably like a whole whole rabbit hole to go down. Again, I would say Larry's book does a good job of kind of talking through that. And I would recommend it for anybody that's interested in it, at least until my book, which I'm not writing.
in due time.
Yes.
Yeah, but you did have your own sort of Green Day-esque success story where you kind of nurtured a band graduating to the majors, which was, of course, the Donnas. Like, what made you sign the Donnas, and how did it feel to prepare them to see them go off to Warner Brothers land?
I mean, it was exciting to work with the Donnas. I mean, I was a huge fan of theirs, and it was also really exciting to be working, with a group that was not just four dudes. In a time where so many of the bands that were successful, and were active in the community. I mean, at least kind of in that more straightforward punk that I think Lookout was, kind of known for. It was rarer for to have that kind of mix of men and women playing. So that part was great. We were not thinking about them, moving on to a major label. It was really just this kind of, we were friends of theirs, and had played shows with the Peaches had played shows with the Donnas and with Raggedy Ann, the kind of the band that preceded the Donnas. And so, I think I was a little surprised that it came up because like locally in the Bay Area, they were such a phenomenon, kind of well loved from all, the different, all different circles, and playing a lot. So it was a kind of, exciting in that regard. And what was even more fun and satisfying was just how well they ended up kind of forging, friendships and connections with other bands, on the label, kind of really becoming part of that community. So, we kind of took each level of new step of success that they, enjoyed in stride. And, even when they moved on to Atlantic, and, we, as a label, kind of continued to be part of their extended orbit. We released a vinyl version of Spend the Night. And Molly, my former partner and partner at the label, was their manager or co-manager. So yeah, I think it was kind of, I think that, when Green Day, kind of felt that they were ready to sign to a major label, it was sort of like we weren't really the label wasn't really much a part of that decision or process. And there's no, I'm not saying that we should have been, we learned a lot going through that, collectively. But the situation, had so changed by the later 90s, when the Donnas were kind of growing in their popularity, and when until the time they ultimately signed, that it was, while yes, you couldn't play at Gilman Street if you were signed to a major label, I think a lot of the other, sort of, scene politics around being successful and being on a major label, had really, really shifted. So it was great to kind of, be part of, their extended team, even though we were no longer, kind of, working with them in the same way.
Yeah. Did Molly stay managing them after they signed?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. So the family was still kind of there. So that's a side question from the music career. So Molly Newman, at the time the Peaches reformed, were kind of she was a Riot Girl legend at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there any pushback for her joining a mostly male band?
I mean, not that I knew of. I think, it was really just, it kind of started as a lark. We formed, while Rop and Carlos were still living in San Diego, and kind of, just really had this idea of Molly and I, wanted to record with Rop and Carlos for a Kill Rock Stars, comp again. And we have this idea like, let's go to San Diego and see them, and kind of like make some kind of band with the rad guys from Rice. And so we just booked a session with Matt Anderson from Gravity Records and from the band Heroin, that we just really we're friends with Matt, and I don't remember like how the songs came together. We just kind of had this idea of it being a one-off, and then kind of just kept it going through trips and things. But I don't recall any, there being any specific, kind of backlash or concern, about that. Everybody that we were friends with were very encouraging. And we did, play some more specific, like we played like a Riot Girl convention, that was at Jabberjaw in Southern California with Sleater Kinney, like, pals of ours, like, there was not I don't feel like there was any backlash. That maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I was too young during that time period to really know. Yeah, in fact, I didn't ever start listening to Bratmobile until their Lookout era, which how did that come to be that like so many years after the original the sole Bratmobile album and EP, like did it come together that that band decided to reunite and get going again?
Yeah, I don't remember all of the, and probably wouldn't be the best source of the person to answer that question. I do remember, very specifically that, when they decided to do that, they'd all, remain friends and, Aaron Smith was, I think, had already moved to Oakland and the Bay Area and was working at the label. And so it just made sense that why would they not release records on their own, the company that Molly was, an owner of and that Aaron, worked at. And I know they're, that sort of, I remember that piece of it, but in terms of why, I can't remember. I mean, it just seemed like part of the reason that maybe they had not been active was because of the geographic distance. And so having, at least two of them, in the Bay Area made that slightly easier, but I'd say you have to talk to them to really get the real backstory.
Yeah, and yeah, although taking us through the two Bratmobile records, which were I think 2001 and 2003, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which were also such, man, to go out with a bang like they did, but like Girls Get Busy was such a potent anti-Bush record. Plus the one song about returning somebody's cheap trick record, like, which weirdly sticks out. Like it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb because it's a great song, but like it was like the much needed levity in this like assault of like, yeah, everything's terrible right now, but also people are still breaking up. Anywho, this is about you. It's not about me reminiscing about my favorite Lookout records. But so eventually, like you guys kept putting out material, and you and Molly were really good at picking bands and signing bands and like putting out really good material. And something happened, and like what, I know there's a lot out there about this, but eventually Lookout Records was no longer. Like what was the decision your guys's to pack up? Did it feel kind of forced upon you?
It's interesting to think about the answer to that question, because in many ways, like, what I think happened slowly over time. And first off, also thank you for the kind words about our A&R. I'm not sure that everyone that's a fan of the label agrees. Some people think that the early era is better than the later stuff, but I like it all. But really, like, then this kind of goes back in the kind of like the timing for Larry leaving. I mean, to think about the late 90s, there was a big explosion of bands and labels, and there was a lot more competition, and there was a lot, really increased set of expectations for what a label could or should do for a band. Tour support, videos, really extensive promotional budgets, and as an established label at that time, it really felt like, oh, we've got to do those things. We need to spend tens of thousands of dollars sending somebody on the Warped Tour and passing out free promo copies of our latest CD, sampler, and it seemed like that was the way to be successful and to sort of compete, amidst this kind of increased noise. And yet the reality is that record sales were kind of flat for us. And I think one of the biggest impetuses for Lynn making the decision to exit was, hey, we stopped growing year after over year. And I thought, oh, that's temporary. Like, we're going to be successful. We're going to work with great new bands. I maybe naively just felt like whatever we had done, we should be able to reproduce. If we've done it once, we can do it again. That didn't prove to be the case, certainly. So, we changed our distribution company, moved to someone bigger so we could help bands get their stores in, get their records in chain stores, pardon me. And these things just really, really were not yielding what we expected them to. And yes, we had records that were selling lots of copies for us, but they also cost a lot more. I mean, Green Day's first album cost $600 to record, and the Donnas or Ted Leo or Avail, those records were not cheap. I mean, they're not major label budgets by any means, but those were the kind of some of our bigger bands, and they cost more money. So actually profiting, I think really the profit kind of profiting in a true way became a lot more challenging. And I think what we did is we sort of kind of kept investing the money that we had available into new things, almost like gambling, and also invested in our staff. And I think we didn't understand, or I didn't understand, that we needed to prioritize royalty payments over everything else, that we couldn't borrow from future payments to keep the lights on and get this new record out the door. We couldn't continue playing that game perpetually. We had, it was going to catch up with us, and it ultimately did. At the end of I guess 2004, beginning of 2000, or was it 2005? I guess 2005. We started talking with Green Day, feeling like, hey, we're not comfortable. We had, we weren't caught up on our royalty payments to them. We were sort of making good faith payments for part, but ultimately, I think, their team recognized, hey, that, the likelihood that this is going to resolve itself in the way that we, that Lookout is saying it will, and that we would like it to, is decreasing over time. And so I think we were certainly forced to face that truth. And it kind of, there was a little bit of a hullabaloo, became a kind of a press-worthy moment, unfortunately, because the reality was far more, friendly and I think sad, between all the involved parties. But it kind of, escalated an exodus, I think, from the label, from some of those key title artists. And then, we sort of realized, like, hey, we can't continue to do this either. We can't support a staff, in this kind of way. And so while there was a sort of a version of the Lookout to support the remaining catalog that did exist, really at the kind of the end of 2005, the label was mostly done, and that's when I, was like, wow, I'm gonna have to get a job now. I'd say, I don't know, kind of a good way to to put a cap on that. I mean, I think in a way I still feel feel the sting of the mistakes that I made, kind of that got us to the point. And I don't know that it that I hope that, like, the the kind of offers of context doesn't come across like an excuse, because that's not what I'm doing. I mean, I think it there were some errors that I made, and this oftentimes combined with like a sort of a naive hope that we were going to, come through this, and that there was going to be something that was going to, kind of preserve everything. And that didn't happen. But ultimately, I have been really heartened by the fact that, you know, despite not existing, and even getting to have some kind of time and distance myself between, you know, with me and the label, that it was really kind of part of my, you know, growth into adulthood and the early, you know, early part of being a grown up. You know, that it's like I can sort of understand, you know, what was good and maybe what wasn't as good with, you know, with the label. And, you know, I'm just happy that people still seem to care about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, in the end, also, neither you nor Molly, as far as I know, have a background in running, like, neither of you went to school for running a business,
No.
which, yeah, and you guys are big, and it's hard to, it's hard to, it's hard to be that big while still like going on instinct and street learning.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say, you know, I mean, I started to do kind of learn about that, and we, you know, work with some good people, and, you know, but at the same time, um, ultimately I felt like, um, you know, what it was a powerful thing to kind of have to acknowledge, like, okay, this really could just be done, and there'd be some work to, you know, to figure that out and clean it up, but it would just, you know, it's like this could actually be over. And I can remember distinctly when, you know, kind of asked, you know, by Larry to sort of, take the reins. I was like, okay, this is going to be committing the next 10 to 15 years, you know, of my life, to kind of shepherd this. And, so it was, you know, I consciously made that decision. Um, and then I think that the decision for it to be done was a decision that was kind of made for me, but one that I, you know, certainly, you know, my, lack of experience, or, you know, just kind of bad business acumen, um, you know, you could say that there's maybe like a contributing factor, yeah, significant contributing factor from those.
Yeah, I do think it's amazing that one of the singles that came out towards the end, I guess it was probably a few years before the end, was "Speakers Push the Air," which by Pretty Girls Make Graves, which is still my all-time favorite song about listening to music
Mm-hmm.
and the magic of music, and yeah, getting through all that, um, which really was just me wanting to mention Pretty Girls Make Graves, so I hit all of the most important Lookout Operation Ivy bands for me to mention. So,
Very good.
thank you. That was so dumb. I'm sorry.
I don't mind.
But yeah, so the end was hard. I snuck a peek on your LinkedIn, of course, because I do that before every interview to make sure I know what happens when.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know that there are some hard feelings from some bands.
Yeah.
Um, but Noise Pop still took you under and like employed you because you're good. Was there any like tension like between like acts that Noise Pop was booking and you being part of their world?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, so, you know, I don't, you know, I think that you know, I'm trying to remember the kind of specifics, you know, for the most part, um, you know, even though we were kind of closing out, business with some of these bands, you know, we still had to talk to each other, and we had to kind of figure out the logistics of stuff out. So, you know, that's what I mean. Like, the reality was a lot less interesting. It wasn't like F you, and, you know, and never speak to us again. The reality is we had to kind of like, um, sort everything out, you know, like a breakup. You know, if you move in with somebody, you still have to split up your records, and you gotta, you know,
Mhm.
negotiate that. So, you know, there wasn't the I didn't experience anything that was kind of like a, you know, a negative, that, you know, kind of like came along. I mean, the reality was the timing was kind of good. I knew that, I was not going to be doing the label anymore. And it was right around the time that Jordan and Kevin with Noise Pop were looking at kind of really building out a full-time staff to support the festival. I had played the festival previously. Jordan had managed one of my bands. So, I was, kind of like knew those guys very well. And it seemed like kind of an exciting, opportunity, and one that, focused on a far less volatile part of the music business, which is live events. And yeah, it was fun to, to get to, help market and promote the Noise Pop Festival, and then, work with, some of my, my kind of like colleagues on my new team, Bill and Stacy, to, develop and the Treasure Island Music Festival in partnership with Another Planet, great, Bay Area promoter. I think it was just focused on the work. And it was very different, from Lookout, kind of was interesting to sort of have a boss in a real kind of way. And I hadn't, for a number of years. But really, kind of, such a great experience and such an honor to be part of, such a, storied and important music festival here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, and yeah, it seemed like you're that second that was your career's second act, was like going and not selling records, but getting people out to shows, like doing marketing for Noise Pop. I think you worked for Bold Italic for a little bit, if I remember right. Yeah, and Ticketfly, of course. Like, which kind of leads me to the next bit, where so there did seem to be something did happen in 2018, if I remember right, if I'm getting the year right, where it did feel like, at least from an outsider, there was like a positive end to the Lookout Records story. And tell me more about I know that you weren't directly involved with putting it together, which is even more fascinating, but the Lookout Records tribute festival that happened, like, how did it feel to like see some young fans decide to like put forth the effort to spotlight kind of the early part of your career that, like, up until that point felt like it ended on a dark note and was suddenly this like magical weekend where I was hobbling on one foot at a show at Gilman, getting to see the Potato Men and Squirt Gun for the first time in my life. Like,
yeah, that was a really kind of unexpected and beautiful experience. So I was, very minimally involved in the organization. The promoter, basically, Alex from the band Sarcasm, was a book shows at Gilman, just a huge fan of the, local scene, and just a kind of like a fan and student of music generally. Reached out and shared this idea with me. I certainly was no stranger to people with kind of, far-fetched ideas. As with most of them, I try to, if there's help I can offer in some way, I, try to, whether it's advice or there's something else, I try to do that. He was looking for contact info, which I really didn't have initially. And then actually, Dr. Frank and I went and met up with Alex, meeting him in person for the first time for coffee in North Berkeley, and kind of shared more of what he was planning to do. And yeah, like it seemed really crazy, but even by the time we started talking, he had actually made some real headway in terms of reaching out to bands and convincing them to reform and make their way to, to Berkeley for like New Year's, I guess, end of 2017, beginning of 2018, for these shows. And yeah, it was an honor. I got to, help with some of the artwork for the posters, and Larry, Patrick, and I did a kind of like a little, I think Larry might have done a reading. We just kind of did a little Q&A at the Berkeley Public Library, in addition to seeing, so many folks from bands that I was just first and foremost a fan of, coming back together and performing again. And then, getting to play with the Potato Men, so, fun and unexpected. So yeah, it was really nice. And it was, the beginning of me sort of, having some distance and getting to sort of engage around, look at, I think, without trying to gloss over what may have been, some of the more difficult truths, but also getting to celebrate what was really kind of amazing, which was the people and the bands, and, realizing that we did do some good work. We did, we may have failed in some ways, but we also, did some great things and kind of made a contribution that I think is exciting to know that it kind of matters to some people.
Yeah. So knowing what you know now, would you start a record label again?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I would, I would do it differently. I think that, one of the things that's not, so clear about kind of the Lookout story is that there was some, the fact that it was kind of started in, with these kind of like a net profit split with bands. There was some kind of fundamental, I guess, structural things that it really wasn't built to be as big as it even got, in a way. And so if I started another label, I would have no expectations of grandeur or that's going to be successful. But I think I would be thoughtful about, kind of clear, simple ways of working with bands. And then just really focus on, creating an interesting artifact. I think that we all have so much more access to music now than ever. And there is something really exciting about physical product, whether it's a cassette or, a beautiful gatefold vinyl with like, special paper sleeve and die cuts. But, to me, that part is the most interesting and fun, is sort of like, how do you commemorate something, the moment of this, and how do you create something that's sort of beautiful to hold and touch? And if anything, that's something I would, love the opportunity to go back, is like into, sort of like put more time in some of the, the art and design that I did. And it's fun. I mean, I still work with the Mr. T experience on some of the reissues they're doing. So I have had the chance to do that, to kind of revisit some of my own work and fix the mistakes, or realize some vision that I wasn't able to at the time because of some limitation, technical or budget or otherwise. But nonetheless, yeah, I probably don't engage as in, music in the same way that I did when I was, a teenager in my early 20s, but it still means the world to me. And if there was something that I felt like I could do or contribute that maybe somebody else couldn't, they believed in a band and nobody else did, then I might be compelled to do something. I guess I did that to some degree when my two friends and I put out a 12-inch for Once and Future Band, like the debut 12-inch, band based in Oakland that I really think are incredible. Very different from, kind of the stuff that Lookout was associated with, but in terms of the people, definitely kind of part of the same, community. And that was just, it was purely around the joy of creating something beautiful, and sharing some beautiful music.
It's awesome. Yeah, I think Once and Future Band are interesting because they're the only band that that have members that play in with both Shannon Shaw, Shannon and the Clams, and the Black Crows somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming up on time. We're actually a little over time, but you had some, as expected, you had some good stories. But I end everything. I begin and end with the fact that I don't know how to speak. With the same question, and the first one is your first musical moment. What would you say to that kid at that ridiculous show at Gilman, when you were a high school student coming down, from deep north? What would you say to them about what you've become and what you managed to accomplish?
So I'm speaking to myself.
You're speaking to yourself as somebody that has a Wikipedia page devoted to him.
What would I say to myself? That is a really good question. I would say, take yourself a little bit more seriously than you do. I think that, if anything, that's something that I had to learn, rather than, and I still probably am, kind of the most hard and fast with the kind of taking myself seriously relative to everyone else in the world. But I think that, take myself a little, or take yourself a little bit more seriously, take some more time with these projects, and with the people that you get to work and collaborate with, and because it's special. And I believe that there's exciting, interesting collaboration yet to be had in my future. But I often think about the kind of the missed moments that the things that were there that I just didn't get to fully experience, or didn't fully appreciate.
That's a lovely thing to share with your teenage self, and I hope you actually would take it in, as opposed to just decide, nah, I'm just having fun.
Yeah, I think you'd probably say, yeah, sure, and then skateboard away.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for coming on. Man, my brain is so scrambled today. It's the fact that it's going from bitter cold to super hot, up and down, I think, yeah, or just the world slightly resuming again.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have been fine. I think I've understood, I'd say, everything you've said, and I can tend to get into odd little word, kind of pitfall traps myself. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself.
I'd like to thank Chris once again for coming on and chatting with me. Don't forget to buy the new Once and Future Band record. It's really, really good. Yeah. I also wanted to let my loyal listenership know that I'm currently diving headfirst into really working hard to find a job. So if anyone's listening that knows any good leads, preferably in the music vertical, for an amazing account manager or customer support rep, or anything, odds are if you're listening to this podcast, you might actually know me. I don't really know, actually. A lot of people are listening to it, more than I expected. So maybe this will seed some magic into the world. Anywho, I do suspect we will have a new episode next week and a new episode the week after that. And my goal is to hit another 13 episodes in a season, and I think I'm going to do that. And then after those 13 episodes, hopefully I'll transition into new full-time employment, and then who knows what happens with this podcast. I think I'm going to try to keep it up, but it'll be pretty irregular when it gets released, I would suspect. Anywho, enjoy the rest of whatever time of day you're listening to this or whatnot. This is all rambly. Bye.